fourth industrial revolution spells a time of great unease and uncertainty.
Most people are going to have to become lifelong learners.
There are jobs out there. It's going to require a shift.
The coronavirus pandemic has left millions of Americans out of work.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the XPRIZE Rapid Reskilling Finalist Team Summit. We thank you for taking the time to join us here today. My name is Monica Groves. I'm Program Manager of XPRIZE Rapid Reskilling, and we are excited to have you here because we are on a journey to forever change the future of work. XPRIZE, along with our finalist teams and wonderful sponsor, we really imagine a future in which all workers can rapidly attain new and more relevant skills to their current workplace and the next one. The solutions that our teams have developed in the XPRIZE Rapid Reskilling Competition are uplifting the labor market in the U.S. and closing the widening skills gap. And we are so happy to have you all here. So as we get into more information, we can move to the next slide, and we'll let you know what you have coming up right now. We're in webinar mode, so the phone lines have been muted for today's event. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. This is a recorded digital experience, and the recording will be shared at the conclusion of the event. If you happen to have any questions while we're on today, feel free to email us, rapidreskilling@xprize.org. Now moving on, we're going to keep the party going. I've introduced myself, and now I'll give the floor to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Monique Golden. I am the social science lead, or excuse me, technical lead. See, I'm reading. We've had some updates this past year. I'm the technical lead for XPRIZE Rapid Reskilling. Thank you for joining us.
Hi everyone, my name is Brianne Ward. Everyone knows me as Bree. I'm the community lead for XPRIZE Rapid Reskilling, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And now you see the team behind the curtain making things happen for the prize. So what I'd love to do is to start off by giving you kind of the origin story of XPRIZE, who we are, and the great work that we do as a foundation. At XPRIZE, our mission is to inspire and empower a global community of problem solvers to really positively impact the world. And we believe that solutions to the world's problems can come from anyone, anywhere. Our role is to define the problems, set the targets, and crowdsource solutions through global competitions, such as rapid reskilling, to incentivize the development of technological breakthroughs that accelerate humanity towards a better future. We provide the opportunity and the platform for people to take risks that ultimately lead to solutions that seemed out of reach or impossible initially. Instead of simply celebrating great ideas, we reward innovators for follow through on their vision to create tangible solutions that are validated through extensive testing and judging. The first ever XPRIZE was a $10 million Ansari XPRIZE for suborbital spaceflight. It captured the world's imagination and catalyzed a multi-billion-dollar commercial space industry, and it represented a massively leveraged initial philanthropic investment. And since then, we've launched 25 competitions in areas of energy, environment, civil society, human health and longevity, learning, exploration, and mobility. And I'd love to give more information about our wonderful sponsor who's on right now. So if we go to the next slide, I'll be able to do an overview and do that information as well. So looking at XPRIZE Rapid Reskilling, you know who we are. We're the world's leader in designing and operating incentivized competitions. Right now, we have 5 teams from 2 countries who are finalists. We just announced them back on February the 28th, and we're excited as we're in this finalist round of the competition. It's a $5 million competition for 3 years, and we really are imagining, the future of work and transforming how we train and educate workers. We launched in June of 2020, and we're sponsored by New Profit, which is a nonprofit venture philanthropy organization, and in partnership with JFF/Jobs for the Future. The competition incentivizes teams to rapidly train and reskill workers with solutions via apps or learning management systems for individuals who are pretty vulnerable to employment loss. The solutions developed in this competition will reduce training time by at least 50% for the occupations that they select, and they must pay a living wage and be provided at no cost to the individual learner, which is very important to remove those barriers. Moving on to the next slide. What I'd love to talk about is our sponsor. Quickly, before I introduce our esteemed guest, New Profit is a nonprofit venture philanthropy organization that backs social entrepreneurs who are advancing equity and opportunity in America. They believe that social entrepreneurs are key in leveraging the change in our country. They exist to build a bridge between those leaders and communities of philanthropists, activists as well, probably, who are committed to catalyzing their impact. Over the past 20 years, they've mobilized significant resources to back high-impact organizations and solutions. And we're really excited because funding for New Profit's Future of Work initiative is funded by Strata Education Network and the Walmart Foundation. So I'm very, very happy to have here today with us from New Profit, Varun Devetha. Varun, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Monica, for the warm introduction. And thank you to XPRIZE Rapid Reskilling for hosting the important finalist session and creating a space to discuss our progress towards a more equitable future of work that works for everyone. I'm Varun Devetha, a manager at New Profit, a 23-year-old national venture philanthropy firm. In my role, I serve on our Economic Mobility Initiative, which includes our sponsorship of the Future of Work Grand Challenge, a $6 million challenge designed to rapidly reskill 25,000 displaced workers into living wage jobs in the next 24 months. America is facing enormous challenges in the wake of COVID-19, economic shutdowns, and the Great Resignation. While Americans from all sectors are being impacted, certain populations, including those individuals without a post-secondary credential, are particularly vulnerable to economic shocks. One of the components of the Grand Challenge is XPRIZE's Rapid Reskilling Challenge, designed to help underserved workers overcome systemic barriers to learning, progress, and mobility, reducing the time it takes to train for and land higher wage jobs by 50%. The finalists in the XPRIZE Rapid Reskilling Challenge move forward from the implementation stage because of their reduction in training time, job placement rate, and retention rate. These innovators have been building new replicable pathways to rapidly reskill American workers by working with the most innovative regional workforce boards across the country through our partnership with Jobs for the Future. Right now, the competition is focused on how we can hasten the adoption of these solutions. Our public workforce system, including job centers and workforce development boards, for example, is well positioned to achieve impact at scale. The most promising innovations that will transform the American economy already exist in the communities most affected by inequality and low economic mobility. This is about a reimagining and unlocking of our resources and systems as we build that new future of work. To do this, we need to de-risk the cost of innovation in a system that is notoriously stagnant and difficult to move. The solutions the XPRIZE finalists are developing must be measured by long-term placement and upward mobility career paths. The skills that we equip new workers with must connect to the fast-growing professions of the future, effectively future-proofing their future paths. XPRIZE is committed to ensuring that these novel solutions actually work in practice. The winning team will have proven its success in reskilling workers into higher wage jobs. Not only that, but they will have proven that their solution is also scalable. Today, I'm proud of what these finalists have accomplished so far by leveraging innovative technologies to reimagine what job training and career development looks like across the board. As we enter the final stage of this competition, I'm looking forward to seeing these solutions start to break down the historical silos within our public workforce system, better serving the needs of employers and workers alike. I'm going to pass it back to XPRIZE.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Varun. Thank you for those words, and we're very happy and excited to have you here today. Alrighty, so as we move forward, we are here because there are some finalist teams. I want to plug them because you're going to get a great opportunity tomorrow to hear them speak. But we, on February 28th, announced our 5 finalist teams. We have Alelo, Team Isotonic, Vital, Dignified Work, and Shifa 360. And these 5 teams represent the US and India, and we're so excited to see the work that they're doing and the 15 occupations that they'll all be training people in across many states and many cities here in the US. And so we just want to make sure that you stay tuned, that you plug in, and know that tomorrow we have the teams coming up, an amazing keynote speaker from Dr. Peter Q. Blair, and you'll get a chance to network with us virtually in the Wonder platform. So just want to make sure you tuned in today. Make sure to come back tomorrow. And with that, we'll move on to one of our wonderful speakers. So we're really excited to have Nish Acharya here today. And let me tell you a little bit about Nish before we get started. So Nish has an amazing background. It is pretty impressive. So let me get that information up. So Nish leads the Equal Innovation, an organization that collaborates with leading universities, governments, foundations, and companies to assist them to integrate innovation and entrepreneurship with their impact-focused strategy. Nish is also a senior fellow with the Clinton Foundation and a contributor to Forbes and the author of the India-US Partnership, 1 Trillion by 2030 by Oxford University Press. Nish previously served as Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship and Senior Advisor to the Secretary of Commerce for the Obama administration, and as Executive Director of the Deshpande Foundation, a prominent American philanthropy foundation on innovation, entrepreneurship, and also he served in the administration of President Bill Clinton as well. He has been quoted prominently worldwide in the New York Times, The Economist, Newsweek, Economic Times, India Today, BBC, Bloomberg, and NDTV, just to name a few. So everyone, Nish Acharya.
Thank you so much, Monica. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. I've had the chance to speak to XPRIZE a few years ago and about global innovation and particularly innovation in the developing world. And then I've worked with New Profit for many years as somebody based in Boston, and also New Profit's here in Boston, and been a real big fan of the venture philanthropy concept. So I'm very pleased to speak here. And as it turns out, I know some members of some of the teams who have reached out to me on LinkedIn. And so that's been great. And so hopefully my remarks won't be redundant to some of them. I wanted to touch base on a few things today, just a little bit about innovation in this space, and then talk a little bit about some of the challenges in terms of the skilling space and how difficult it is to achieve change, beyond your innovation, but also then tell you 2 examples of programs that have worked at achieving some sort of scale with their programs, and talk a little bit about why those pathways and those broad-based partnerships are so important, and that journey is so important from innovation to scale up. And so hopefully at the end, I will have been helpful in thinking about this broader skilling ecosystem for you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Next slide. So without advertising, just a little bit about the work that I'm doing. I run an organization called Equal Innovation, and we're really focused on the fact that there are so many startups now around the world that are focused on mission and impact. And so there's about 5,000 accelerators around the world now. These are tech transfer centers, innovation centers, accelerators. And there's 2 interesting points to note about them. Most of them are not in San Francisco and Boston and New York. They're really spread around the world. And so as our speakers were saying earlier, XPRIZE believes anyone can innovate, and successful innovation can come from everywhere. We really need to do a better job of doing that, because the venture capital is still in those 3 cities, even though we know great ideas are everywhere. We also need to think about the challenge. When you look at skilling, for example, there's several billion people in the world who need skilling support, either skills because they're younger and haven't entered the workforce, or reskilling because they are, been moved out of one industry or another. And so, the four things that we're really focused on are that idea of inclusivity, the idea of equality, that every good idea deserves a chance, that ecosystems and communities are really important. The old saying, it takes a village. And then commercialization must happen faster and more efficiently. Again, going to this area of skilling, if several billion people around the world need some sort of skills development, education, or reskilling, it's not going to be the one founder wins model. It's going to have to be multiple startups, multiple technologies, all winning a little bit in different parts of the world. And so if we move to the next slide. So I wanted to share just a little bit of the challenge in the skilling and reskilling space. It unfortunately does not happen at the speed of innovation. And I thought I'd bookend the last 20 years as we talk about the internet era. So in the early 2000s, it was becoming clear that in the American economy, young people needed to develop the skills for working in technology. And the job opportunities were with companies like Microsoft, Cisco, which are still around, Sun Microsystems, which some of you may remember and some of you might not. But the example here I use is of Sun, but pretty much everybody went through this, where they actually invested significant resources in developing curriculums for high schools, community colleges, all sorts of nonprofit organizations to train young people in Java programming language. But the way the American system works, it took, and also the way their grants were organized, it actually took 2 academic years before students could take those courses. And right in the middle of that, Sun announced that they were going to outsource several thousand Java programming jobs. And so you can imagine you're a high school principal and you're saying, do I offer this Java programming class? Or, they just announced that all those jobs are going to India, Philippines, and elsewhere. And as you can imagine, it didn't take off. And so the speed of technology, the speed of globalization was happening so fast that, it just didn't take off as a proper training activity in American schools. And, as a result, a lot of, the programming talent continued to be abroad, or programmers coming into the United States on programs like H-1B. And this wasn't just Sun. Microsoft had this problem with its own work. And then Cisco had an incredible set of networking academies to train young people in the Cisco technology and how to use it, but went through a lot of those similar iterations of launching something, and by the time curriculum is developed, it was out of date. And for those of you listening who think that, well, that was 20 years ago, technology now is much better. We have AI, we have this and that. We know that that's not the case, because there are still structural impediments to reskilling quickly, right? So right now, one of the biggest is that financial aid through FAFSA and other programs is really only available for the largest online education providers. And so the Coursera's and others, you can use your Pearson loan, you can use others, but the government is a little bit wary of for-profit providers, and it's only those large ones that have gone through the process of making it available to students. And so most people in the United States do require some sort of financial aid for their reskilling. And so if you can only do it through a few outlets, that is certainly a barrier that needs to be addressed. The other one is that most Americans don't go to elite schools. They don't go to 4-year colleges. They take multiple years, and they take their training at other institutions, whether it's workforce development boards or local nonprofits. And they are also not built to introduce courses with new technologies quickly. It's not fair to take something that's really cutting edge technology, like some of the AI or VR stuff that many of you are working on, and ask community college to turn it around really quickly. And so that challenge remains as it was 20 years ago, that how do you quickly get something approved? And again, thinking that, these courses, if they're offered in public institutions, it's only fair and responsible that they go through a vetting process where we know the technology works, we know that learning occurs, and that it leads to positive outcomes, whether those are jobs or job opportunities, whatever the outcome may be. But you're not going to just introduce something until it's proven. And so while we might cut the time from 2 academic years, it's highly unlikely we'll cut it to less than 1 academic year, simply because of calendar and approval process and all that stuff. And we may not like it, but there's no MVP in this work. It has to be a proven proven solution in terms of learning focus. A couple of interesting other things that I would mention is, Coursera now is launching and retiring courses in just 18 months. And so again, this is a really interesting challenge for the reskilling space, that we are seeing technologies needed in the marketplace come and go at a really, really rapid speed. And so what all of you are doing with your innovations becomes really important, because if that's the case, then we know that this infrastructure of community colleges, nonprofits, workforce investment groups just will never keep up. And so if Coursera, with its resources and the technology platform and the millions of users, can't keep it going more than 18 months, then we certainly need to think about what technology tools must we use and put into place. And the last thing I'll mention is just that micro-credentialing, which is sort of talked about in this space, that you can reskill in a different setting, get a micro-credential, stick it on LinkedIn and go from there. The reality right now is that most large employers are not necessarily recognizing micro-credentials unless it's from a few specific institutions or online education providers. And so, the quality is very hard to rate, the quality is very hard to discern of a credential, and unless it's a well-known brand, we don't know what that person actually learned or what credentials they have. Now, you can say that that's the same for our higher ed system anyways, but there are more checks and balances there because it's been around for a while. And so all that is not to say that the technology is not going to be transformative. It's just that we know there are societal challenges, both from a regulatory side of how we approve content and skilling, but also from sort of a cultural aspect of how people learn and the resources they have to spend on learning. So these are all things that I think all of you are going to need to think about as you go into the reskilling space and are looking at your VR tools or your technology tools to rapidly skill up. It's one thing to have a bunch of folks in an early trial. I think 5,000 is the goal here, and that's amazing. But when will that translate into approval to go in the California community college system, which has hundreds of thousands of students at any given time? So some things to think about from your perspective. Next slide. But there's been two models that I wanted to bring up where I think they have shown that you can be successful in reskilling at scale if you put in the right time and energy in understanding the customer and understanding the context, both cultural as well as economic, right? So the Deshpande Foundation, where I used to work, runs a skills development program in India, and it actually started after I left, so I had nothing to do with this program other than to know that it's there. But they really looked at the context in India, where the economy is growing really, really fast, and there's a need for lots of workers in the economy, but there's no way that a country with 1 billion people is going to build lots of campuses and offer lots of multi-year degree programs. It just doesn't make sense. And so what the foundation did, like a lot of skilling programs, is focus on a couple of things that were clear needs in the economy. So drivers, basic sales skills, hospitality industry, and then IT customer service. And over the course of the last decade, they went through this journey that really had 4 stages. The first was sort of developing the local knowledge and relationships in the communities they were serving. So no matter where you are in the world, there's sort of a cultural context. There's a reason people go to school or do not go to school. There's family pressures, there's other opportunities. And so they spent a lot of time, and again, this is not strategic, this is sort of what happened, if you will. I spent a lot of time developing that local knowledge and relationships to understand what the context is around skills development. So it turns out that driving is just not something people want to do unless they're in big cities, because it takes you far away from your family. It's hard to get married. There's all these things that you don't think about when you're building a technology or designing a curriculum that turned out to be very relevant. And so that's why the soft skills became very important as well. The cultural issues, communications, presentation skills, how do you dress, all this sort of thing. And we do the same thing here in the United States with a lot of our workforce programs and teaching this sort of professionalism, if you will. Their next stage was to then experiment with what types of skills development was going to be useful. And instead of jumping in on one specific thing, they initially actually started with the idea of supporting entrepreneurs and finding brilliant young people, helping them start a company, and then they would become the employers in the region, employers who would then hire hundreds of people, thousands of people, and by supporting that elite leader, they would, create jobs in the region. And that certainly works in Silicon Valley, works in Bangalore, which is a big city in India. It doesn't work everywhere else. And so that idea of the elite fellowship program, the entrepreneurship master's programs, they are important, but they didn't lead to large scale job creation or skills development through that. And so what then you started to see was this pivot towards basic skills development, which is again, driving sales, things like that, but a much more greater reliance on partnerships and some sort of a model by which the person participating in the class, in the skills development program, had some more skin in the game than they did otherwise. And so they introduced this wide-ranging set of programs. They did it in partnership where the foundation was developing curriculum, providing seed financing, so vendor financing essentially for the students to participate in the program, and then paid back over the course of their sort of income, similar to a student loan. But the foundation provided the capital for that student loan because banks were not going to do it for somebody who's going to be a driver at a hotel or do IT customer service. And so they found alternate sources of capital to do that. So they figured out the model for partnership. They figured out the lending model with the participants in the program. And then ultimately they were able to find corporate partners who worked with them to do specific tracks like hospitality, where a lot of the big hotels would work with them to train workers year after year, or just general, sort of community development where they were developing a skilled workforce. And they were able to build out much broader ecosystem that looked at this stuff in a regional view, not just as a technology or a specific course. And so now they're one of the largest skills providers in the world in terms of skilling annually, 8,000 people skilled, some in a residential model, a lot of it in a virtual or satellite campus model that where local colleges provided the solutions. And I think what I want to leave this on is it's the largest such program, but it has low rates of attrition, but not insignificant rates of attrition. And that's something to know that no matter what you do with a lot of these skilling programs, these issues of culture, communications, presentation are still real, and somebody can work and get an A in the course, and once they join the workforce, they can still have challenges working with other real people, working in office for the first time. All these things are real challenges worldwide, and so even when you do something really, really well, some of these other issues prevent us from getting us all sort of where we want to be. Next slide. More close to home here in the United States, another program I want to highlight is the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, which is a partnership of the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, Century Foundation, and Clinton Global Initiative. And it's really called Industry and Inclusion. And their sort of journey was slightly different, but again, sort of building out what needs to be done and the partners that need to go there. And so they were looking at the needs in the manufacturing space. I think the data shows that we'll need at least 2 million manufacturing workers in the United States over the next decade, simply based on retirements, attrition, growing opportunities in sectors that will stay in the United States, such as defense and others. But then, we've also read these trends about supply chains reshoring, some of the manufacturing to the United States, or initiatives to bring new industries and keep them in the United States. So maybe that number is bigger. We don't know. But we don't have the workforce to fill it unless we maximize the people who live in our community, the workforce that is hiding in plain sight, as some people are saying. So people of color, women, those particularly in urban areas or peri-urban areas that can come into the city. And they're currently underemployed, but a lot of them have gone through school and received an education. So it's not similar to the Indian context where you're starting often from scratch. This is where you provide some targeted training and you have a large workforce potentially available to you. And that's what they're focused on doing. So recently, their latest cohort, they have 22 colleges, community colleges nationally that have signed on, and they developed this 18-month advanced manufacturing credential program. And so, as I was talking about earlier, some of the challenges with the time frame and what have you are there still. But in this case, they feel that the advanced manufacturing areas they're focused on, because they're product-based, because they're tied to patents and things like that, they're going to continue to be relevant for many, many years. And so they've tried to address some of the challenges I mentioned earlier that Sun Microsystems and Coursera and others have had. So they built this community network, and then they really focused on urban areas because, as we know, for better or for worse, urban areas have the power of the concentrated labor pool, consumers, infrastructure, all of that stuff. And so it made sense to focus on urban manufacturing. The makers movement is generally been around tech hubs and universities. And so the next generation of products are coming out often of these urban areas. And it's important to stay close and grab those workers when those products start to take off. And then one thing that's always been important to me, we don't think about, 67% of American patents are related to manufacturing. And so when we think of patents and intellectual property, these days we think of Silicon Valley, we think of tech, but the reality is the vast majority of it is related to manufacturing. So innovation plays into this, and the role of innovation and commercializing it in the United States and having local workers who can work in those industries and trained for it. And so, in this model, they're really hitting upon a bunch of the challenges we have, and then trying to do it in a concentrated manner. So we do need a rural manufacturing alliance as well. And hopefully somebody will think about that model and how to build that up. And I know New Profit's done some work around rural and small towns. And so we need that as well. But the urban manufacturing one is really an interesting one to me because they're trying to connect the dots with innovation and workers, again, hiding in plain sight who could join these industries. So I think that's the end of my presentation, and really just wanted to thank you for the opportunity and share a little bit about how groups have been tying together the different parts of the skilling ecosystem in order to have an impact, but also how difficult it is even when you're doing amazing work. So thank you.
And thank you so much, Niche. We appreciate that insight. And I think it's really great to see what people have done before the current teams are competing and to learn from what has happened before them and institute some of those changes and those learnings and what they're doing now. Thank you so much. So we can keep it moving and we can move over to our roundtable. We're really excited to have three amazing professionals here today. And we're going to talk about some issues, some things we want to talk about, such as ed tech, adult learner engagement, and outreach. So today on our panel, we have some amazing people, and I'll get started giving you a little bit of information about each one of them. So first up, we have Jeff Wald. Jeff is a serial entrepreneur, board member, and best-selling author. He does keynotes, and he's also an investor. Jeff is co-founder and chairman of two new technology startups, Bento Engine and Sonero. Jeff's previous company, Work Market, an enterprise software platform that enables companies to engage and manage freelancers, was acquired by ADP in 2018, where he served as senior leadership team until 2020. Mr. Wald also founded several other technology companies, including Spinback, a social sharing platform, and it eventually got purchased by Salesforce, which is really cool. He began his career in finance and serving as managing director at activist hedge fund Barrington Capital Group and vice president at venture capital firm Glenrock in various roles in the M&A group at JP Morgan Chase. So we're wonderful to have Jeff. And then moving on, I'll introduce our second roundtable panelist. It is Lassie Freeman, who is the director of corporate partnerships at Zip Code Wilmington. Zip Code Wilmington is a nonprofit 12-week coding camp, and it's in Delaware, and is where she's responsible for corporate relationships and other strategic partnerships, with ultimate responsibility of helping to place Zip Code graduates in paid technology jobs. Founded in 2015, utilizing the Pay for Success model, Zip Code Wilmington has successfully reskilled and upskilled over 500 full-stack object-oriented software developers and data engineering in Python and SQL. With the minimum education requirement of a high school diploma, 86% of their graduates have landed and remained in coding jobs, earning an average salary of $74,000. And historically, 31% of their graduates are women and 33% are underrepresented minorities in tech. And our third panelist on our roundtable is Holly Heikkinen. A lifelong entrepreneur, Holly brings nearly 3 decades of experience to the world of independent work. She is an expert advisor for the national associations, such as being a trustee on the Committee for Economic Development and chair of that same committee's Advancing Women in Corporate Leadership Committee. She also serves as board advisor for the Conference Board's Human Capital Center. Holly is also a founding member of the Coalition of Workforce Innovation. And as a tireless advocate for common sense reform, Holly brings her fight for the rights of independent workers to the halls of Washington, D.C. and the boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies. Holly launched iWorker Innovations to meet the unique needs of the independent workforce, and iWorker Innovations partners with national firms and associations to provide bundled portable benefits that create a business and social safety for independent workers. So thank you, Jeff, Lassie, and Holly. We're happy to have you here today. And we're really excited to talk about some cool perennial issues that are happening in the world of ed tech, adult learner engagement, partnerships, funding, innovation, and how we can move the needle and make sure that we show up and are responding to what's happening right now. So to get us started, let's see. We're here because of EdTech. We have teams in the competition who are creating possibilities through their apps and learning management systems. And we're always thinking about what's the new thing. So I want to start with the question: how can technology-based solutions such as AI, robotics, and other emerging technologies bridge the digital skills gap?
Let's just jump in because I'm.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I'm gonna just jump in. I'm gonna white man this and just go first. So sorry about that. So look, when you look at the history of work, which is what my book was about, right? Like, what can we learn from the last 3 industrial revolutions as we plan for the 4th industrial revolution? You always see these skills gaps develop over time. There are certain skills, they get massively in demand because of technological innovation or process innovation, and the education system can't catch up. And in future industrial revolutions, the pace of change was slow enough that the education system catching up, as Nish said, the education system takes time to catch up, was kind of okay. I mean, it was suboptimal, but it was kind of okay. Now it's not. We can't wait for the traditional education system. We need new technologies and new processes to bridge these digital gaps because they are very, very acute in the near term and are causing a lot more disruption this time around than they have historically. That'd be my kind of perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I think next I'll go to Lassie. So same question. How can technology-based solutions such as AI, robotics, and other emerging technologies bridge the digital skills gap?
Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. Congratulations to the prize finalists. This is really, really exciting, and I'm so happy about the work that you're doing, particularly the scalability of it all. I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Jeff said, but I'm also going to push back and challenge it. So prior to COVID-19, Zip Code Wilmington was an in-person training institution. And we thought the only way that you can really do this in a highly valuable way is face-to-face, like many educational organizations. After COVID, or prior to COVID, actually, we really quickly pivoted to a virtual model. And after that, we've gone to hybrid, and we realized that we could train people just as well virtually as we could in person. And so it disrupted our previously held assumption that the only way we could do this was face-to-face. But I think it's accessing and finding people where they are and changing our definition of what it means to be educated and learned. I think a lot of Americans, I don't know worldwide if this idea is still widely held, but we think of, you go to 4-year college, maybe you get a master's degree, maybe you get a doctorate, and I'm done. Okay. Or high school diploma, I'm done. I've learned what I'm supposed to learn. And so we've got to go through this process, Jeff, of changing the way that we view that and creating these ways of getting credentials, of getting a specific skill, of making it more of a regular way of living that I'm always going to be learning. I'm always going to have to get an additional education or new skills in order to keep up. So digital tools, yes, but first for me, there's a mindset shift that has to occur. And it has to be on demand. It has to fit the way, the lifestyle of people, the learners that we want to reach. And so how do we connect those things? First, shifting the mindset. And when they're here, if you build it, they'll come. But first is getting people to look for opportunities to reskill, upskill as a regularly occurring thing. This is just what I do.
Thank you, Lassie.
I'm in agreement, Lassie. Per usual, you are correct. No argument.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Holly next on that question.
Yeah, actually, Lassie, I'd say we're definitely in alignment with our thinking. I am actually right outside of Detroit in a more rural area. And I think that we need to really take technology and start to look at and assess communities and really what type of work is actually available around you. So, actually 2 cities from me right now. It's a very rural area. A lot of the children literally go into mechanics or running, heavy equipment, farming even. How do we help those children, assess what their skills are? Well, I should say children or young adults, right? So we're talking around 25 is the reskilling of the participants today. But how do we help them look at even the opportunities which are quickly changing? When I reference being right outside of Detroit, 2008 crash, a lot of brilliant IT professionals, engineers lost their jobs overnight. And what did they do? How did they refigure this out? It was very challenging, and that's actually what made me go into what I'm, focused on now, which is independent work and people being in charge of their own destiny and finding their own work and placing themselves and having the ability to even assess themselves. So I definitely think that we have an ability to use technology and artificial intelligence to assess communities, assess the work that's actually there and the work that can be produced, and then you start to fill in the gaps of what the heck do I need to do to make myself more, applicable to X and X business. So that's kind of my 2 cents right there. And I've got a lot to say about the rural community, but we can save that.
Well, thank you so much, Holly. And I love what you say, looking at what technology can do to prepare someone for an opportunity, but also what are the opportunities that are out there? Because we could all be training to be goat herders, but hey, there's no demand for goat meat or goat milk, or so we have to make sure that we're actually attuned to what's happening. Now, that was a weird example, but hey, goat
It
things.
works.
I know what you guys are just saying about online learning and really using technology. And with the pandemic, everybody had to pivot or shift. If you weren't already on board, it was a bit tougher than usual. I know Lassie's saying, like, prior to the pandemic, you guys were already shifting some of that coding training to online and more virtual means. And a good question would be, definitely due to the pandemic, many barriers were already in place for online learners. And they have been removed because increasingly there are ways to get more access. But new barriers have emerged. For you, what you have seen, what are the implications for the future of work when considering changes in online, blended, and digital learning now that we're in the pandemic? So I'll say our first person to go, I'll say Lassie.
Gosh, you got me. I'll speak to something, and forgive me if I'm a little bit random or all around the place, but we work in software development. So we're training software developers, data engineers. And as many of you have probably seen in this industry, there are a lot of neurodiverse people who are extremely talented in this field. And so while tech is great, there might be some gaps, and I'm not an expert in it, but there might be some gaps that we see emerging with people with neurodiverse backgrounds, need to interview, way of engaging, way of learning. And so we're all about trying to meet the learner where they are and providing them an educational experience that really leverages their strengths and talents. And so I think that might be a challenge with some of the digital tools that we'll really have to explore, and some smarter people than me will need to figure out what that looks like.
Thank you. I think we assume that because there's more access, there's programs, people are giving away tablets and laptops and phones, that everybody's good and just log on and do it, but not thinking about meeting the worker or the learner where they are to ensure that they can enroll in the program and actually succeed through it. And for those that were used to a more hands-on, partner or mentor or coach, how does that relay virtually? Definitely. Let's see. Jeff, what is your opinion on implications for the future of work when considering changes that have occurred to online learning and digital learning during the pandemic?
These are new modalities. And anytime we see new technology introduced in the world of work, it's suboptimal in its first implementation, and it needs to iterate, as with any technology that's brought to market. And so I get concerned that people think, oh, remote work is great or remote learning is great, and that's it. No, it isn't it. You touched on a few very, very important things around, first, the digital divide. Just because we are doing online learning doesn't mean everyone has access to broadband internet. Doesn't mean everyone has access to a quiet space in which to do that work. Everyone doesn't have access to the Oculus headset or other things for a VR training module. I think a lot about the mentoring and the soft skills that go into the classroom environment and all the other kind of learning. It's important to remember, humans are a social animal. we actually don't want to be sitting by ourselves, connected via digital connection 24/7. When you look at, and I can only speak about this in kind of the world of work, which is where my learning is, most people don't want to go fully remote. That's what all the survey data would say. That's what all of the early indications from workplaces are. They want a more flexible work schedule. They don't want to be there 9 to 5, 5 days a week, much like a student may not want to be there in the classroom all the time, on a rigid schedule. They want that flexibility, but that flexibility shows that they do want to be in the office some of the time, bordering on the majority of time, because humans are social animals. And so I worry about the digital divide. I worry about the mentoring and the soft skills, and I am very conscious of just human psychology in these new changes.
Yeah, definitely, because it can be isolating. We're having to take into account the mental toll of almost being required to socially distance for so many years, especially for those social butterflies and those who tend to, flourish in those environments. It definitely is different. And I think it's taken this opportunity for us to all slow down and really be retrospective but prospective. And how do we take the best of both worlds and make it work for moving forward? Because we definitely have changed. The days of even, everybody going to the office is no longer. We're really seeing that people can be productive and work, be productive and learn and gain skills while not physically in a building all the time. And I think as we get to a point with that hybrid model of figuring out what works best for the student, what is their, learning method, and how can we make sure that we're teaching them in a way that they're willing to receive that ensures their success. Because it's not that, well, I can't see you, I can't micromanage you, therefore I don't trust that you're doing what you're supposed to do. You have to be trustful of the student, of the worker who's here for the opportunity, and let them do their thing, but in a manner that honors them, their time, the things they have going on outside of work or class as well. Holly, how do you feel about that? What new challenges are springing up now in the pandemic that we have pivoted to a lot more virtual learning, online, blended, and digital?
Yeah, so it's a great conversation, because about 6 months ago I decided to be really, really honest. I lead, a few different groups, and one day leading I decided to start it out with, everybody goes around, how are you doing? I said, to be honest with you, I'm dying on Zoom. And I really meant it. Like, it's hard. I'm very extroverted. Right. So we have a lot of learners right now that have totally moved into a complete mobile, virtual world in their homes. Some of them, like Jeff said, they don't have a quiet place, or they don't have any, place to even, call their own space. So even focusing is really a challenge. I'd say, there's a lot of challenges that have already come to the light, and I think we're dealing with them. And I want to be totally honest, I don't know what those future challenges are going to be. But I can tell you something I'm already seeing a major trend of is really, how do we assess and deal with the emotional, spiritual health of people? The mental health aspects are really a challenge. And I think that that's going to be a bigger barrier than we are giving light to right now. And I also believe that there's some way to use technology to assess that, and maybe hopefully some of the participants are looking at those kinds of things. There are certain triggers, we each as humans have created habits and ways of thinking and thought patterns and all these little things inside of our own self that, not everybody is assessing. How do we get to the root of those to help us learn and engage better? I definitely think we do have to find a way to get to a more present space, though, and we need to put more time and resource into our communities. Some things have to go back to the basics, like it or not, or I think we're going to really lose a lot of people that have so much value to add to the future generations.
Thank you. Thank you. And lastly, Jeff, do you have anything additional to add as we continue to speak on this?
I'll add to what Holly said, that we had a lot of students who deferred. We'll wait until it's in person. So there are people that prefer that want that human engagement. So while we were training people for the work environment that they went into, a lot of our students who graduated over the last 2 years have gone directly into jobs where they've never set foot in the office. And so that was a reality, and it was kind of a benefit. We were training people in the same way that they would then be working. But you do miss out on that human element. You do miss out on a lot of those professional development skills and networking skills, and even being on time. We've not tested that yet. A real program was getting there early. Early is on time. If you can get somewhere, you've got half the battle down. But if all you have to do is roll out of bed and push a button on your screen, are we really pressure testing people in the same way that you have to, when you manage your time, to physically get to a workspace or environment? Or is that going to even be necessary? Will it be optional? I do think that technology, from my perspective, is also widening the opportunities for people in terms of geography, that we've seen that now you can work anywhere for the most part in the world by not having that physical requirement of being there. Creates opportunities, changes real estate algorithms for us in some strange way that I don't know how we're going to see that play out also in the future.
So I'll just throw in some data here on the current state of the labor markets, because I think that people tend to over-index to the narrative, and the narrative right now is, oh, all work's going to go remote. Hard no. All work is not going to go to remote in any way, shape, or form. Start with the data that only 42% of the US workforce can work remotely. Most people can't work remotely. People in transportation, logistics, in retail, in manufacturing can't work in a remote context. So when this conversation starts, it starts with the minority of the labor force. And then many people in what could be done as remote work don't do remote work. And so the highest end estimate is that remote work will move from 3% of the labor force before the pandemic. And remote work has a very specific definition of more than 50% of the time you do not go into the office. And it has that definition because of tax nexus. Because if you're 50% of the time in a location, you establish tax nexus there. So it is tracked. People that have flexible work, it's very difficult to track. We don't know if you go to the office 1 day a week, 2 days a week, but if you go a third day a week, that's now 60%, we track you. And so the highest end estimate is that 3% pre-pandemic would go up to maybe 7%. And that's the scope of the change we're talking about here. And I assume a very similar set of data patterns exists within the education system. I don't know it, I haven't studied it, so it's not appropriate for me to talk on it. But it is appropriate to bring up the point that we need to, in these conversations, base them in data and evidence and not in the narrative, because people get caught up in that narrative. Oh, everyone's going remote. No, only certain types of work that is available to only certain types of workers can go remote. And then to our earlier points, most people, though, will still opt to be in the office some of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I see that there are some comments in the chat, just speaking from an attendee who had neurodiverse daughters. One is in college, and she's just concerned that employers will be willing to look past her social limitations and welcome her and her neurodiverse peers as they are, in the office or continuing through a virtual space. But one thing that she said our daughter did miss was that community. So thank you guys for, being active in the chat and in your own way, contributing to the conversation. And as we're talking about that more human-centric thing, we talk about adult education, because what we're working on right here with rapid reskilling is reskilling and upskilling for adults 18 and older here in the US. And so, traditionally, teaching models are aimed at youth. And how can individual adults learn? It really depends on their life. It depends on situational, familial, employment needs, learning styles. And a good question is, how can adult learners empower themselves to accomplish their educational pursuits? And what systems are most important to support them in getting there? So let's see, Holly, would you be willing to go first?
I'd rather hold off. Give me a moment on that one. Yep, that one.
Let's see, Jeff? Oh, you're muted.
I was passing to Lossie.
I feel like I'm on a game show. Can you please?
Poor Lossie. That's a tough one.
I was pointing that way because that's where Lossie is in my Zoom screen.
Hollywood Square. I'm over here. Can you break it down into pieces? Maybe we can address smaller chunks.
Pretty much the question, we're talking about situations where teaching youth is different from teaching adults. Adults definitely have lives. You have children, you have their soccer practice, they could be caretakers for elderly parents or family members. And also the learning style is different. If you haven't been in like a school or a class in a while, you're rusty. He's like, what's this new learning thing? There's a new math I hear of. But looking at that, how can adult learners empower themselves to accomplish their educational pursuits? And what systems are most important to help them meet that, being that they have those adult situational barriers?
I'll share that that zip code Wilmington, the average age of our students is 35. So we are taking people who have done something else in life, whether they were a line cook, Amazon package delivery person, teacher, on the back of a garbage truck with a minimum of a high school diploma, they can come to zip code Wilmington. We find a lot of our recruits come by word of mouth at this point. We've got over 500 graduates from, and I'm in Wilmington, Delaware, a state of 1 million people. So that's quite an accomplishment here. I would call that scale here. And it really was a grand experiment. Our founders are just 3 local people who saw this gap between the jobs that were open and the statistic about the 2 million jobs that would be unfilled by 2020 and decided they wanted to do something about it. We have these people who are capable. And so our motto is that that talent is distributed evenly, opportunity is not. How do you bridge that? So initially our program, and it has remained that way, is 3 months. It's 12 weeks. It's short for a reason. It is full-time and it's full on. Our students complete over 1,100 hours of intensive training. It is cohort-based. So I find that adult learners enjoy being part of a cohort, part of a team, part of a support network, and they really do help one another cross the tape. Our motto is really no person left behind. And we have about a 98% graduation rate. I think also we provide scholarships and stipends. We always have. We're one of the few programs that has Vet Tech, which is a full scholarship for our veterans. And we also have I think adults are really focused on the monetary. I can do anything for a short period of time if the payout is on the other end. And in our community, like so many other communities, there are lots of workforce development programs that have promised this or that, or people have done what they've been told to do. You told me to go through this. If I do this for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, there'll be some reward, and there has been no reward. So really how we measure ourselves is on the job placement rate. So while we don't guarantee jobs, and I don't have guaranteed placements for them, my job as corporate partnerships director is to find corporate partners that will hire those graduates. So we're only taking in as many as we can reasonably find jobs for. And so if you know that, if you can come in on average, our students come in an average of making about $28,000. By the time they leave zip code, they're earning an average. I've got to update our number, Monica, because now it's closer to $84,000 a year for the last couple of cohorts. That's a serious light at the end of the tunnel. So I think adults with a proper support, a stipend through the program to get through, they can really manage it. And so that cohort-based model, having a stipend and having a real reward at the end that will get them out of the program forever, like you don't have to see them again, are kind of some ingredients for our success.
Yeah, thank you for saying what the incentive was and the type of learning environment that seemed to net success for those who go through your program. I see those are some things that maybe our finalist teams are needing to know and understand what is working elsewhere, and maybe pivoting to make sure they have flexibility in their programs to be able to accommodate those. And Jeff, I saw your hand up.
Well, this is why I wanted Lassie to go first. I mean, she knows like 1,000 times more about this than I do. I'll say this. Going back to college and going back into a classroom for some people at a later part in life has a stigma associated with it. It's like, they failed in their initial attempt at education. They have to go back. And so I've seen and read a lot about that. And stigma plays such a powerful part in a lot of issues we have from a occupational standpoint, whether it's the trades right now, because people feel like, oh, if I become a plumber, I'm not a success. Plumbers are making 6 figures, and there is a massive shortage of plumbers and electricians and all kinds of other things. But there's this narrative that if you don't go to a 4-year college, you're not on the right educational path, which is just a false narrative. I will say that the notion of generational change, for those of us that study the history of labor, is usually a false narrative. Somehow that a new generation applies something entirely different. People say, oh, millennials or Gen Z have very little company affiliation and they associate with mission and brand. That is no different than how a 20-something applied themselves in 1980. And so there just is, of course, there are some changes that do persist, but generally that generational shift is kind of a false narrative. I will violently agree with many things that Lassie said. One is I just love the, talent is equally divided, but opportunity is not. And there is a nonprofit in New York called the Opportunity Network that I had the pleasure of being a founding board member of, and we have the same tagline, because it is so incredibly true that talent is very evenly distributed in society, but the opportunities that we give are not evenly distributed. And if we want to make those opportunities evenly distributed, we need flexible models of skill attainment that can work with people's schedules and lives and remove any stigma. And that's why an online program, a VR program where I can do it in my time. The counter to that, by the way, is that the post-secondary for-profit system in this country has had a very poor track record of outcomes, constantly mired in scandal, and they're not as ROI driven as they need to be. You generally have a bunch of people in there that are just getting people to sign up as much as possible, despite the fact they're not going to get the education and outcome. So making very, very clear what their ROIs are. So whether it's stigma, whether it's generational changes, a false narrative, flexibility, or an ROI nature that is truly accurate, those are the kinds of things that come to mind for me when talking about how do we address educational and skills attainment generationally.
Thank you, Jeff. And as we talk about educational skills attainment generationally, I would love to pivot to that same thing, but look at geography. I know, Holly, you spoke a lot about the rural community outside of Detroit. And is there anything that you see in regards to education and attainability for rural communities as opposed to those in Detroit proper, more of an urban setting?
Yeah, well, Detroit's a whole new place than it was even 5 years ago. It's amazing to see how many younger people are moving there, and I don't like to, I guess, delineate between ages and all of that, but it's really interesting because the tech, innovation that's going on there, and really just the innovation in general, the arts, the culture, kind of the scenes it's a lot of fun, and a lot is changing, and there's a lot of excitement no matter where I go down there. But then moving out to the rural community. And actually, I got to say, I'm one of those people that have friends in all places, right? So there'll be a day where I'll be down in the hood hanging out in Detroit with my Detroit friends, to be quite honest with you. And then there's the next day where I'm having a dinner in New York with, my business colleagues. So I kind of play in a lot of different spaces, and I have learned so much by doing so. I'm constantly in awe of people. One of the things I've learned, though, and I don't mean this to sound prejudiced at all, is that there's some communities, whether they be out here where I live in Livingston County, Michigan, where there's so many people that don't think for themselves. They don't know to use their brain. They don't understand process of elimination. They don't have the ability to apply cause and effect, certain things like that. So I personally think that, like, how do you empower somebody to persevere and to know what they need and to even make the step towards reskilling themselves? A lot of it has to do, I think, with our leadership, and has to do with the resources in communities. And really, a lot of it has to do with so much as news and social medias that they're connecting with. Empower people to think and question, if I apply X, Y, Z to this, what are the possible outcomes? And so maybe you could say to somebody, and I'll use an example right now. And I like to use personal examples. One of my children, he owns an excavating company. He's doing amazing. He's 23 years old and making over 6 figures a year very quickly, because he's replacing a lot of these older people that were running this heavy equipment. Now he's doing it and rocking it. For me, I'm already looking at it and saying, oh my gosh, I'm seeing all over the place, a lot of these machines that you're using are being run by what I would call a joystick, right? Like an Atari joystick or whatever. Right, exactly. So how do you start to prepare yourself? So a cause and effect is, yes, you're doing this, and today you're making this money, but it could be really in the next 10 years, you're displaced by technology and these other people that have put time and energy into advancing and learning their craft or their skill or their trade, whatever it might be, and how technology applied to it. So I'm trying to summarize here when I say, like, how do we get people to think of the future? How do we empower them to understand, like, if you do this, you might get this outcome, and that might be better for you. Another thing is there's so many people right now that are in, caring for elderly, right? Obviously, we're in this whole, baby boomer age, and really a lot of elderly people that are very sick and need help. I'm dealing with it in my own life. How do you help them to see the future? Like, how do you help them to get some resource in their area so they can rely on somebody to come for 2 or 3 hours so they can actually learn the next piece? Maybe they have to be hands-on for their skill set. Part of it can be done online, but part of it needs to be done there. So how do communities get more resource? And then one other thing I want to talk about is there's a huge gap in verification for employment. So I have watched, and actually I just spoke at a national conference that was in Puerto Rico for last mile delivery drivers. There's millions of people that are in the driving industry right now. And what I saw is what I heard from the leaders of almost 50 major companies throughout the US is there are people who want to work, but they get shot down and beat down because we don't have enough technology to move in and verify that they are qualified for employment. Some of these companies, these bigger companies, it was taking them almost 3 to 4 weeks. They might say, okay, yes, you're hired. You can start this date. One of them jokingly said, and I wish I could say their name because you'd be like, oh my gosh. They jokingly said, yeah, we're the only place where we hire somebody and they never show up their first day. We call them. Because, this is an instant society too. So how do we help people deal with those kinds of things that technology can fix, but we're not getting granular with our technology down to communities and counties to do background checks. So we're causing this massive amount of people to be frustrated and feel hopeless. Here I am trying to work, but then I can't even get my job for a month. Like, that just doesn't work. So I'm kind of going all over the place, but I'm touching on a few things, but we have a lot to fix, you guys. A lot to fix, and the participants in this team, the finalist team, really need to be thinking about these foundational things too, to be future successful companies, to create future successful innovative solutions.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. And one thing you said earlier that resonated was getting the message to people if they're not open to it. And it's hard because it could be cultural.
Yeah.
It's small, tight-knit communities, but also it takes people power, and it takes someone going in and engendering trust with the gatekeepers or the community leaders or the stakeholders, the church, the mayor, the sheriff, because that's who they listen to. And you sometimes have to figure out who the target is and go for the target so that the community can then be opened up to the opportunity. And that, unfortunately, sometimes isn't as rapid as we would like it to be, but sometimes just engendering trust in the community and embedding yourself there and giving before you even get to the point of this opportunity could be a way that you get in, but it's definitely a longer game and a longer play to be able to do that type of one-on-one engagement.
Yeah, and how do we fix that? Again, there's some ways that technology can fix that, but we need the right people taking a look at it and assessing and applying a solution to that problem.
Definitely. Hey, Jeff, I see you have your hand up.
I'm so focused on being in school. I'm like, yes, I always feel the need to raise my hand. I just want to build on, one of the things that Holly had said around background checks, and I'm going to expand it to drug tests as well.
Yeah.
When we look at the skills gap in the United States today, and we are somewhere between around 4 million workers short in the United States from where we were pre-pandemic. They just simply have not come back. And the data would tell us that that gap is driven by two things. One is early retirements, people for either because the stock market was up so much, or because for health reasons with COVID, they just were like, you know what, I'm retired. It's too much of a risk. And that's cost us about 2 million incremental workers that have left the labor force prematurely. Hopefully they'll come back. And the second reason, which actually numerically I should put number one, is immigration. We just have curtailed immigration so much in the United States that we are about 3 million workers short of what we should be, because immigrants come into this country are a massive net positive in every single way, shape, and form. Like every data point and every study will tell us that immigration is a massive net positive for the United States. And so those are big issues. But part of the skills gap is that we have a massive drug test and background check issue. So Holly, to your point around technology, the technology here is really challenging. Having run this platform Work Market, where we ran tens of thousands of background checks every month, you're just reliant on the state. And the states simply haven't automated. They will at time. There are some states where you can do the automated background check like that and get your response. There are other states you have to send a human to the Hall of Records to physically go and look to see if that person has anything on their record. That's kind of problem number one. Problem number two is the background checks that companies run are still too stringent. So somebody had a minor offense 3 years ago, they can't have a job? Like, that's just crazy. And the same can be said around drug testing. Somebody, the number one thing that people fail drug tests for, marijuana.
Marijuana, right?
Like
And
smoking weed, like
everybody's
who cares at this
Right.
point?
Mhm.
And I sit on the boards of a few public companies, and I had to have it out with the CEO because he said, well, I drug test for marijuana, and 40% of the people they made job offers to couldn't start because they failed a marijuana test. And he just felt that it was a moral failing on their part. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, look, I'm not going to have you removed for this, but if you think I'm going to give you any relief on your bonus payment because they were missing targets because they couldn't hire people, because you were putting this in place, you're out of your mind. Like, there is no difference between someone going home, smoking a joint, or having a couple glasses of wine. And be that as it may. And both of these things obviously have very big racial and different community impacts that are massively part of an institutional problem we have in this country. And I'm hopeful that technology, that changes in laws and changes in processes will help those issues. But these are all kind of self-inflicted wounds here, right? We can change our laws, we can change our processes through which we hire, we can change our immigration policies and do a host of things that would be massively beneficial. But, Holly, to your point around common sense legislative reform, there's just no capability to get these things done in our current political environment, unfortunately. But I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
Always hopeful.
Same here. And
Stay hopeful.
Monica, if I may, that's
please do.
another great, big problem is, there's, I'll give an example. I made a bunch of political movement that was positive. It had nothing to do with what party you were on under the old administration, and the new, they shut everything down that we had worked on. And I get it, but the two people, both sides of the party, are just wanting to protect people and move forward. And that's all in the independent workforce space. But Jeff, you bring up a good point, is how do we change and affect policy to maybe standardize credentialing, right? Because these 50 major, well, there's almost 50 major companies I'm talking about placing last mile delivery, drivers all the way down to food delivery, to auto parts, to groceries, to on and on, on and on. All the different types, is every company has a different standard and a different thing that they're looking for. And some of them that get extremely granular. And and unfortunately, it's really affecting those rural communities too. Because I can tell you, I need food delivery out here. I would love to have the brake fluid I need for one of my vehicles right now. I'm afraid to drive it until I get it in there delivered to me. But I can't find that here. If I live in the city, I could. So, there's just a lot of things we need to fix, and the policy is not catching up either. So I don't want to get off, track too much, but, that's a part. But the reality is the foundational issues with some of our policy is what is actually negatively affecting our workforce. They don't feel like they're ever going to get ahead anyways. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know we're getting close to the end. We have about 15 minutes left, and I have 2 questions left. We had a really great question in the chat, and I want to put that to you guys. It says, with the great resignation, what jobs are people really looking for? So we're saying people aren't going back to work. Well, what jobs would they go back to work for? Is there any trends or any information that you see that lets us know what are people leaning towards when it's time to re-enter into the workforce?
I'll happily go first. Oh, sorry, Lussie, are you wanting to?
I was just going to say software development, but I'm like a hammer with a nail. We do. But Bureau of Labor Statistics has software development, data engineering growing at a rate of 22%, and all other industries combined are growing at a rate of 4%. So I would say software engineering, data engineering. We have some gaps, some racial gaps there, underrepresented minorities in technology, and women that we need to bridge the gap there. It was a white boys club, tech, software development was really created along those lines. And so getting people to look at it differently, raising our girls differently, to realize that this is a career and a profession for you, getting people in communities that might not have had as much access to technology to understand that you can get from, just being a user of this tech to being a creator. That's really intriguing. And also thinking about biases that are being embedded in the coding and why we need to get more diverse people involved in that industry. But technology, software development, any of the languages, I think most of those are growing fields. Holly?
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. I would also say that I don't know that it's actually, I can speak to the type of work that people are after. I can speak more to the lifestyle of the work that they're after. So everything I focused on this last 7 years primarily has been about the independent workforce. So people that kind of direct and guide their own future. And the things that they're looking for is constantly coming back to the reality of they want quality of life. And quality of life looks different for different people. They want to work when they want, how they want, and where they want. And it might look different today, and it might look different next month for that same exact person based on what's going on in their life. So working with specifically CED and the conference board, the leadership there of some 400 of the major companies in the US are really looking at things like, how do we obviously utilize technology to empower these people, but how do we keep working on flexible work style, flexible work at hours and those kinds of things? How do we manage their production, their output, things like that? So it's not really maybe occupation for me. It's how do we tap into what it is they want? Maybe they want to take a month off. Can we just let them do that? And that's necessary. How many people, like the gal that was saying that she has a diverse children, I think she said 2 of them, if I remember. So how does she maybe take off a moment to go deal with X, Y, or Z that's in her life with her family? There needs to be that ability. We need to care about people. And we need to look at what in the heck is it that these people need to be successful and emotionally, mentally stable and happy. And it changes.
So I have little to add here, but won't stop me from talking. I think you've heard, the 2 most powerful trends from a employment evolutionary standpoint. One is hard tech. Hard tech is far and away the largest growing skills category. it's just not even remotely close. And second is the movement towards independent work, and all the work that Holly and her teams are doing at iWorker are just absolutely vital as we continue to evolve the labor force. The only thing I can really add besides bolstering these 2 brilliant people's points is we need to look at data, because the Great Resignation is, again, somewhat of a misnomer.
Yeah.
So we traditionally have, over about 40 to 42 million people a year quit. That is what we would have expected in 2020. But in 2020, because of COVID, many people didn't quit. We had 6 million fewer quits. In 2021, as we started to come out of COVID and then Omicron and whatever, we had catch-up quits. We had 48 million quits. So we caught up the 6 million quits that we missed in 2020. So if the quits stay elevated at the over 4 million quits per month, then I would say we have a Great Resignation, and we should talk about structural changes that are happening in the labor force. But the early indications from January's data, we don't have February's data yet, is that quits are starting to return to normal pacings. And so I think the Great Resignation is much ado about, I wouldn't say nothing, but it's not a structural change in the labor force yet. We may, again, view it that way in another couple quarters of data.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And as you're talking about data, Jeff, I have another question. We talk about data collection all the time. And we're always people should, collect data, the team should, the company should. But what data should be collected beyond routine demographic information? Is there some effective data collection methods that you know of that can really be leveraged in the area of ed tech and as it pertains to our teams and their learning management systems?
Look, I am a very data-driven person, and my entire study on labor is what can the data and the data trends tell us? And so this is an area where, especially when you get into education and you talk about GDPR and PII, personally identifiable information, and the general data protection rights that came out of the European Union and has now been copied in California, and most American companies follow. I don't even know how that stuff applies to education. And I imagine it is much more stringent about what happens in the education system, because when you look at education in the United States and healthcare, these are the two industries that I think are the most troubled in the various industries in the US economic landscape. And I would argue that the reason for that, there's certainly a correlation, I would argue there's a causality, is because they're the most highly regulated industries. And those regulations, incredibly well-intentioned, but very difficult to adjust regulation to fix the modern context in a real time, because legislation moves at a glacial pace, whereas the economic progress and innovation and all the needs move at a much, much, much faster pace. So I don't know, and I'm sure my two co-panelists will have much better answers to this, despite the fact that I am a data nerd.
Let's see, Lassie, do you have anything? Say nope. Holly?
No, actually, I don't either. I'm enamored with just statistics. Every time I hear them, I'm like, I wish my brain worked like that.
Well, we can pivot. I have another question. I know, Lassie, you spoke about the success that you have, where you have about 80-something% of people who are actually graduating for your program and being placed into actual jobs in software development. So what are some successes or some things you've done to secure corporate or employer partners to hire those students who successfully complete your program?
Thanks for the question. It's a fundamental part of our design. I wish I could take full credit for it, but it wasn't my idea. It was our founder's idea. So they started from the back forward. So they went to the companies and said, what is it that you need? What skill set is it that you need from the workers? We've got all these jobs open, but seriously, what can we teach them? And how do we condense that down to a short period of time? So we still have a steering committee comprised of our corporate partner membership. So they're CTOs, heads of engineering and so forth that help us. And so as our panelists said earlier, that curriculum is constantly evolving. It is never the same. It is constantly tailored to what the business needs. So we're teaching exactly what is needed for them to be able to hire them. And the second thing is we have a unique financial sustainability model. So we talk about funding and nonprofits and how do you make this a revolving door to be able to continue to train more and more people. So when we first started, there were less than a dozen nonprofit coding boot camps. There are lots and lots of for-profit coding boot camps, but very few nonprofit coding boot camps. And so our financial model is that it cost us $15,000 per person to provide this training, transformative, life-changing opportunity. The student pays up to $6,000 upfront for their tuition. We had to raise that from $3,000 to $6,000 during COVID. And then the corporate partner pays the remaining balance of that tuition, so up to $9,000 per person when they hire them. So that financial model is really what makes us unique and special. And it lets the student or learner have some skin in the game. And it provides that support on the back end where the employer has skin in the game. So they're constantly feeding into it. And we do that because we're providing a needed service. It costs about $15,000 to go to the street and recruit people, to hire a recruiter, look for the right people who have the right skill set, onboard them. Maybe they'll show up, maybe they'll take another offer. So it's a cost saving benefit for them. We're providing a really needed beneficial service. They know the quality of what they're getting. They continue to hire them 500 later. Those people are now in managerial positions. They know the quality of our program. We're creating a really big network. So to that point about how do we instill this idea of learning as a constant, is we're creating a sea change in this region where it's a tech world. We want Delaware to be on the map as the leading state for technology talent. That's why employers are choosing where they're going. It's no longer what are the rebates that the state is going to give us. It's what kind of talent do you have? How quickly can you upskill the existing workforce to do what I need them to do? So we're really just an instrument for that. It's the model. It's not even the what. Today it's software development and data engineering, but it's really just a model that could be replicated anywhere of find what the employer needs, work with them to design a curriculum that can be taught in as condensed a period of time, get them to pay for them on the back end, and people will go where the jobs are. So all you need is a good newspaper article that says XYZ company is hiring. If you have the skill set, here's the program that provides the training. what we have today, and I'm sorry I get on my soapbox about it, is we have training that's not linked to employment. Why?
Yeah, but that's one of the
That's
audacious
good.
things about this prize is trying to make sure that the trainings lead to employment, and teams are seeking employer partners in the target cities they're targeting for round 3 to make sure that when people successfully complete training, that there is an employer who's willing to hire them, pay them a living wage. And it's really important that the training actually pertains to the actual job. You don't get trained to be a, neurosurgeon, but you're going to have a job as like, a landscaper. So just that disconnect definitely is there sometimes. And
such that
okay.
If you don't land a job using the skills that you acquired at our school, you don't owe the remaining balance of your tuition. That's it. So we have skin in the game in it as well. And when people hear that, they go, oh, you must really be confident in what you're going to do for me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so Jeff, and then Holly, wrap up.
First, if ADP is not a corporate partner of yours, I will take it as an action item to introduce you to the team at ADP, and they will become a corporate partner because I love what you guys are doing. But I wanted to ask Lassie a question because this is, again, outside my area of expertise. Is there an issue with the students coming up with that initial payment? And if so, do you guys look at different startups that will fund that with a stream of the student's income once they get a job? Like, so there's no direct loan. There's I forget what they're called. I think it's ISRs.
You'll be hearing a lot about income share agreements in the future. They were touted as something that was really great for the student, but we found that they're really not that advantageous, that they basically sort of indentured our students to give a portion of their payment, and it didn't work for us. That's not really what we're about. We do provide stipends and scholarships for anyone who is below the poverty line. That changes 200 or 300% of the poverty line. And we're so proud and grateful to the state of Delaware. We just received a grant for $4.5 million over the next 3 years that makes attending zip code absolutely free for any low and middle income person who's a resident. So yeah, it's a game changer here. It's just awesome. So move to Delaware, come to zip code for free.
Thank you, Lassie. Thank you. And Holly, do you have anything?
So I work with what I call aggregators. So a company that utilizes or deploys large amounts of independent workers. They are not their employees. These companies too need reskilling and freshly skilled or upskilled workers. And unfortunately, that company can't help to pay for the reskilling of that worker because it's not going to be their employee, and that violates DOL rules and regs. So that's another problem that we need to address. Is education is expensive no matter how it comes. And there's 55 million people out there in some fashion. Maybe it's just their 5-hour-a-week gig that may be able to bill more, charge more, and make more if they had more education. And how do we get to the root of helping those people too when they're not attached to that employer as a W-2 employee? So another big challenge I think we've got to fix.
Thank you. Thank you. And we have come to about the end. So I have one question for each of you. If you can give me a word that reflects how you plan to revolutionize the future of work, what would that one word be? Let's see. Holly, first.
One word? Portability. That would be my favorite word.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
Ability.
What was that again?
Flexibility.
Got it. We got the ability. So. And Lassie.
What was yours again, Holly?
Portability.
Portability.
Flexibility.
Flexibility. And how about accessibility?
Oh, all right. All the abilities.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We've come to the end of the roundtable. I'd like to thank Jeff, Holly, and Lassie so much for your time today. We appreciate the candid, often funny, but yet real conversations we've had. And I'm thankful for the value you've brought to the table. I hope the teams and those who are on really enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate and just be here in the mix. You always learn something. I'm over here taking notes. I'm like, what did Jeff say? That figure, his mind's like numbers. And I'm like, people, People, words. Yeah. So thank you guys so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. And to all of you, thank you. Thank you, Nish. Thank you, Varun. Thank you, David and Elizabeth, who are in the background, who are behind the curtain, making everything work for the Zoom. Thank you to Dr. Golden and Bree on my operations team. We could not have made this happen without you. And we're very, very excited that today is the start, and we continue this team summit tomorrow. So join us tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon for day 2. This is 4 fingers. 2 of our finalist summit via the same webinar link you have today. We are so excited because tomorrow our 5 finalist teams will be talking to you. They'll all have time on the stage. You'll hear more from them, where they're from, their solutions, their present, their future, and how you can tap into it and be a part of the great work they're doing in the competition and outside of it to revolutionize the future of work and get people into well-paying, living wage jobs so that they can really change the trajectory of their lives and the lives of their family that comes after them. Of course, we'll have an amazing keynote from Dr. Peter Blair, and you'll get a chance to network virtually in the Wonder platform. So those details are forthcoming, and you already have them in your box. And with that, we bid you guys adieu, stay safe, and we'll see you all tomorrow.